Welcome to our Time to Break Silence event about suffering in Gaza and censorship in the US. At our Time to Break Silence events, we combine activism and art, music, and educational talks. You can find more on our website, atimetobreaksilence.com. A Time to Break Silence was co-founded by the singer Devon Tynes and me in 2012. And this year, we look forward to welcoming the journalist Sam Husseini, and we'll have music by David Rovics. And thank you all for purchasing tickets and supporting the Middle East Children's Alliance. You can visit their website at meccaforpeace.org. The Middle East Children's Alliance, Mecca, works to protect the rights and improve the lives of children in the Middle East through aid, empowerment, and education. In the Middle East, Mecca provides humanitarian aid, partners with community organizations to run projects for children, and supports income generation projects. In the US and internationally, Mecca raises awareness about the lives of children in the region and encourages meaningful action. The Middle East Children's Alliance, Mecca, is a nonprofit humanitarian aid organization based in Berkeley, California. Mecca supports children and families in Palestine, Iraq, and Lebanon. And now I'm going to read a poem by Mossab Abu Toha, and then we'll have music by David Rovics. Every child in Gaza is me. Every mother and father in Gaza is me. Every house is my heart. Every tree is my leg. Every plant is my arm. Every flower is my eye. Every hole in the earth is my wound. Now we're going to have Song for Gaza by David Rovics, and then Sam Husseini is going to give his talk and answer some questions.
If I could sing a song for every bomb that flies, I'd sing each and all the days. If there were to be a verse for every dying child's cries, for every helpless father's gaze. If I could write a love letter to each corpse as it's carried, I'd never still my pen. If I had to stop a moment for each one as it's buried, I'd never move again. And the stocks are going up somewhere in America. Sing a song for Gaza. For every home that bombs destroy, if I could shed a tear, they would never stop flying. If each broken brick were a heart of a little girl or boy, all the world's children would be crying. If I could hold each shattered body, each baby stilled at birth, I'd have no time for loneliness. I'd spend all my days embracing the people of this savaged earth, feeling the poisoned wind's caress. And the war profiteers are laughing somewhere in America. Sing a song for Gaza. If each barren pharmacy were a woman's shining eyes, I'd fall in love forever. If each bombed out hospital were a factory in disguise, wouldn't that be clever? But bricks are only bricks, and dust is only dust, and death is all around. Each minute another missile falls, and sometimes the only thing to trust is the shaking of the ground. loading up the warplanes. Somewhere in America, sing a song for Gaza. Sing a song for Gaza.
That was Song for Gaza by David Rovics. I would like to thank Kelly Lane for the slideshow. And now I'm going to introduce our guest, Sam Husseini. Welcome Sam Husseini for the second time. He spoke last year at our event about Vote Pact. Sam Husseini is an independent journalist currently writing at husseini.substack.com. He has written extensively about Palestine and international law. In 2023, he repeatedly wrote about the possibility of a country invoking the Genocide Convention against Israel at the International Court of Justice, which South Africa finally did. Husseini attends State Department and other briefings asking tough questions. Other political interests include geopolitics, free speech, big tech, weapons of mass destruction, and COVID origins. Husseini is founder of votepact.org, which encourages left-right cooperation to undermine the establishment duopoly. He recently started papersproject.com, a forum to share strong flyers that can be passed out strategically. He is also a visual artist. He is senior analyst at the Institute for Public Accuracy. Sam Husseini has written articles for a variety of publications, including Counterpunch, The Nation, and The Washington Post. His work is currently available on various other platforms. See husseini.org. And earlier this year, Sam Husseini tried to ask Secretary of State Anthony Blinken some questions, but Blinken didn't want to answer. And we're going to watch a short video about what happened there. And then we're going to welcome Sam Husseini to speak.
2 or 3 people. You pontificate about a free press. You pontificate about a free press. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. You are hurting me. I am asking questions after being told by Matt Miller that he will not answer my questions until I'm asking questions. Wasn't the point of the May 31st statement to block the ICJ orders? You blocked the ICJ orders.
Please, sir, respect the process.
Oh, respect the process. Respect the process. Well, everybody from Amnesty International, to the ICJ is saying that Israel's doing genocide and extermination, and you're telling me to respect the process. Criminal, why aren't you in The Hague?
And Sam Husseini actually suffered a concussion as a result of his treatment by the security guards. Thank you so much, Sam Husseini, for joining us.
Great to be with you. You left out the best part. I kept hollering, why aren't you in The Hague 2 more times? I wish I kept going. Thank you very much for having me on, Orson, and thanks to Kelly as well for helping organize this.
So I was thinking, would you like to give a talk first, and then afterwards we could ask some people could ask some questions. We can't see the audience from here, but they can see us, and they could type in their questions after you give your talk.
Sure. Why don't I just talk for a few minutes and then we can do Q&A? Is that all right?
Yes.
Is that all right, Orson? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, thanks so much for inviting me. And it was that was a beautiful song by David. I don't think I've seen that, heard that, and I love David's stuff and his and that slideshow by Kelly was great. His music helped fuel a good deal of my work over the last few years in terms of inspiring. I think that the role of art, I myself am a visual artist, the role of art is really central. So I'm really glad that that's part of what you're doing here. I'm not going to, recap, the devastation that Israel has wrought on Gaza, the genocidal intent, the, scorching of hospitals, schools, places of worship, refugee centers, and so on and so on. Let me talk just a little bit about how I think some of the machinations are that Israel and the U.S. use to hoodwink people, and then some tools for how I think we can overcome that. Um, uh, we're currently in a so-called ceasefire that isn't really. Israel is continuing to attack Gaza, but the immediate fatalities are generally more like 10 people than 100 200 people as they were prior to this so-called ceasefire. So that's some measure of relief. However, we have a winter approaching, and Israel is not only not letting doctors and relief in, they're not allow regular medical relief and food in nearly the sufficient quantities. They're also not allowing shelter aid in, so that people are going to be vulnerable, extremely vulnerable, for the coming winter. This ceasefire is so-called ceasefire is the third, and I hypothesize that they were all done at very Machiavellian times by the U.S. and Israeli establishments. They've basically been and there was actually another ceasefire that they called in Lebanon that sort of factors into my analysis here. And the two main targets of the U.S. and Israeli establishments, in my view, are international law and democracy. So the first Gaza so-called ceasefire was just around Thanksgiving of 2023. And I think that says why. I think that the U.S. didn't want families gathering at Thanksgiving and having a meaningful discussion about why the hell are we backing this daily slaughter. So do a ceasefire so that people in the United States don't coalesce around Thanksgiving Day table to say, what the hell is going on here? What the hell is wrong with our government? It's a ceasefire. Hooray. And we move on to whatever. The second so-called ceasefire that wasn't at all really a ceasefire was called by the Biden administration, or announced on May 31st, 2024. And they did that then because the final and most direct ICJ order had just come down. South Africa had invoked the Genocide Convention on December 29th, 2023. They had a series of hearings at the International Court of Justice, which gave orders, not opinions, orders. And finally, they gave their most direct order on May 24th, saying that Israel must stop the attack on Rafah. At that point, Biden got up, said, hooray, Netanyahu's agreed to a ceasefire. If you read the Israeli press closely, Netanyahu said, I did. And then that's how, and then the U.S. got the UN Security Council to pass a resolution blessing this completely farcical, phony ceasefire. They even got Algeria to vote for it, which had been drafting a resolution to implement the ICJ orders. The ICJ is a court. It issues orders. The UN Security Council is supposed to act like the sheriff and implement those orders. It failed to do so in large part because Biden hoodwinked everybody into believing that this farcical statement constituted a meaningful ceasefire. Much of the so-called peace movement was fooled by this, and the so-called international community allowed themselves to be fooled by this. And that derailed the ICJ orders. Then in Thanksgiving of 2024, Israel was attacking Lebanon, and they announced a ceasefire then for the Lebanese part of the war. Israel had been attacking Lebanon because Hezbollah was showing some solidarity and, sort of opening up a second front so that Israel wouldn't be able to slaughter Gaza without any retribution. They killed Nasrallah, the noted leader of Hezbollah, and Biden announced this phony ceasefire right around Thanksgiving 2024, again, to prevent meaningful conversation as families gathered. And another so-called ceasefire was called just as Trump came into office. And it was phony, but it kind of lasted about a month. And the point of that, I believe, was to manipulate the US public into getting Gaza off of their minds, that the national storyline was now Trump and his antics, and not there's a genocide going on. In this summer, you had Petrov, the leader of Colombia, finally move on sort of the second stage of invoking the Genocide Convention, of going to the UN using a procedure called Uniting for Peace to override the manipulations that the US did in the Security Council with the 2/3 vote in the General Assembly, where there are no vetoes and it's one country, one vote. They could, in effect, call out the Security Council. And Petrov, again, after a lot of people, including myself, pushed for this, Petrov basically did that, basically building on the South Africa genocide case. Just after he did that, Trump comes out with this phony peace plan that's a kind of a colonial plan, with him and Tony Blair presiding over a board for peace. Tony Blair, who was, of course, infamous for working hand in glove with George Bush to devastate Iraq. So that's basically where we are now. And so the current work is to try to stop the US from forcing the UN to bless its current insidious peace plan. There's a sort of more moderate version of Trump's plan, backed by the Saudis and the French, called the New York Declaration. It's also extremely dangerous, but it's not quite as brazen as the Trump plan. What should happen is that countries should back a Uniting for Peace proposal that would provide a protection force for Palestinians and get sanctions on Israel, kind of using the South Africa model. This was actually done against South Africa in the 1980s. And there are other examples I can go into if people want. So that, I think, is one critical way that we can change the world. That is to, at a global level, confront the US empire and to democratize sort of globally. The other pivotal way that I see that we can affect meaningful change that's very much underappreciated, and I think is growing dramatically in significance, is to realign US politics, that is, domestically. And that's what my Vote Pact project is about. What it entails is, instead of people effectively being captured by one part or another of the duopoly, where you have people holding their noses and voting for genocidal candidate Democrat and rather than genocidal candidate Republican, that they pair up and both vote for non-genocidal, pro-democracy, pro-transparency, pro-free speech, pro-economic justice candidates that are not backed by Wall Street. And ideally, they would do it in pairs. That is, I believe that there is what I'd call a radical center in the United States. And you can see this even among the leadership. I think it's more prevalent in the grassroots, but even among the leadership, you're now seeing on the Republican side, Tom Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene break in some ways from Trump. A lot of people are seeing this because of the Epstein files, that they're seeing that the entire establishment is intermeshed with this incredible corruption. And as Dropsite News has recently reported, Epstein was very much working hand in glove with Israel, as many of us, knew all along. But this gave additional documentation to that. So instead of people being appendages of either part of the political establishment, they crystallize a new establishment center, and you run from the center. Time and time again, people, the Green Party or whatever party has attempted to run from the left or the right, and when you do that, you're immediately dismissed as a spoiler. So even people who agree with you on the issues will say, "Oh, I can't vote for you because voting for you is effectively helping the guy that I hate more." So Vote Pact solves that problem by having people come together and voting in pairs. Now, it requires trust. The two people have to know and have a serious conversation. And there is a thing out there called Break the Duopoly that pairs people up online, and people can do that if they like, but I think it's far more powerful. It will be far more powerful if people do this with somebody that they know. I believe this is a revolution waiting to happen. And I feel like I'm sort of playing the part of Morpheus, and there's a Neo out there who can start to help crystallize people, to pair people up. And if somebody out there is already voting third party, you can play a central role in this because you can be a matchmaker. You can get your Aunt Betsy to pair up with your second cousin Louis, and instead of her voting for genocidal Democrats and him voting for genocidal Republicans, you have a meaningful conversation with them, get them to talk about what they really want, and do they really want to be appendages to one arm or another of the establishment where they're driven by hate, or do they want to join together and break out of this oppressive structure? So those are and you can, in a sense, call that uniting for peace as well. That is, domestically, it is uniting for peace against the duopoly. And it's sort of similar in spirit to the notion of uniting for peace. That is, the nations of the world uniting for peace against the U.S.-dominated Security Council. So those are two of the main projects. And I should say a word about the Papers project that I've started recently. It's just getting started, but the idea for that is, we're in an age where not only, as has been long well known, the establishment media is completely dominated by elite interests and manipulates the U.S. public, but big tech as well is manipulated in even more sophisticated ways. Most recently, you have Ellison, Larry Ellison, the second richest man, owner, head of Oracle, huge database corporate firm, biggest donor to the Friends of the IDF, private donor. He's taking over CBS, or his son is trying. I think it's hard to keep track. I think his son is taking over CBS, and he's trying to take over CNN, but he's taken over TikTok USA. So trying to squash some of the few things, especially TikTok, with young people, educating them on Palestine and so on, squashing one of the few things that are out there that did get information out there. So these are the problems. And what Vote Pact, the Papers Project is, papersproject.com, what that attempts to do is to have flyers that people can download, print, copy, and distribute. I made one that people could do at churches, because I was hoping that the churches, after the student protests would be the next to move. And I have a flyer on Uniting for Peace and several other flyers to foster activism. I'm hoping to develop more and more flyers that people can use at strategic locations. Imagine a flyer that people can distribute at military recruitment centers, at military bases, at courthouses, at post offices, in front of specific think tanks, flyers that document major political figures' pattern of lying that could be distributed whenever they go out to speak somewhere or in front of their offices. So I'm hoping that this will be a tool for people to basically help reclaim the town square. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Now I would like to open it up for anyone to ask a question in the comments. We have a question here from James Barada. In Congress, what stands out to you about Trump pulling support for Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has been critical of Israel? And how could lawmakers that break with the AIPAC-funded herd leverage public opposition to Israel's occupation and crystallize that revolution you mentioned?
Thank you very much for that, James. There are several things that both stand out at me and several things that I think can and should happen. First of all, I think that to the extent that Marjorie Taylor Greene is breaking with Trump and with the establishment, she should be applauded. It exposes Trump as being a completely phony America first. He tries to be America first, tries to pretend to be America first, and goes to extreme lengths to pretend that. I mean, even in his immigration issue, he continuously tries to reframe Gaza and genocide as an immigration issue by putting ICE out there and so on, so that he can rally his anti-immigrant base. And that needs to be called up for the manipulation that it is. And much of the right wing that says that it's anti-immigrant should be even more pro-Palestinian. Palestinians are literally dying and getting killed and slaughtered so that they won't be refugees, so that they won't be immigrants. They should be the number one heroes of the right wing. And I think perhaps Marjorie Taylor Greene sees some of that. But the main dynamic that we're seeing here is that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tom Massey, they're not even being that critical of Israel, but they're not drinking the Kool-Aid completely. That Israel is attacking Iran and attacking Syria and attacking, it's been called a lunatic state. I think that's an understatement. I think it's an insidious imperial state. And they're basically like, why the hell are we backing this? The one particular form of leverage that I think Marjorie Taylor Greene could push further than she has is Israel's nukes. She's been one of the few members of Congress who has talked about Israel's nukes, but she's done so in a very weird way. She's basically said Israel can defend itself. Why, it's got nukes. Why the hell does it need us? That's kind of a bad way of putting it, because it almost says Israel could go ahead and use its nukes and defend itself. We don't want that. Now, U.S. law stipulates that the Glenn Symington amendments of the Arms Export Act, that funding shouldn't go to states that are nuclear proliferators, and Israel is a nuclear proliferator. There's actually an article by Desmond Tutu, his last published article back in 2020, made this case for Archbishop Desmond Tutu for cutting aid to Israel, basically calling on the then incoming Biden administration to cut off funding for Israel. So that, I think, she and other members of Congress, I think, should really use that as leverage and to call out the establishment for refusing. The U.S. government refuses to acknowledge. I asked the State Department about this just a few months ago. They refuse to acknowledge the existence of Israel's nuclear weapons arsenal, which is certifiably insane. Especially Israel keeps hooting and hollering about Iran's alleged nuclear weapons program, which isn't a weapons program. I think that might be a particular form of leverage, but I think that this is exactly indicative of Marjorie Taylor Greene not going with the genocide program 100%, like Tom Massey and other Democrats doing the same. They have a lot more in common than they realize, because it has ramifications for free speech. It has all kinds of ramifications for Wall Street control, for big tech control of our lives, and so on. And those two sections of the political spectrum should be coordinating much more closely.
I also wanted to ask more about United for Peace. What can American citizens do to support Uniting for Peace?
So Uniting for Peace is a process whereby the UN General Assembly can basically take control of the situation after the Security Council fails to fulfill its primary function of maintaining peace and security, particularly if a member refuses to continuously vetoes something. The U.S. has vetoed 6 resolutions calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, a real ceasefire. This has been used critically 2 other especially notable times. One time against South Africa. It's it was used to call for economic sanctions and an arms embargo and other comprehensive sanctions in 1991, and that helped formulate the sanctions movement against South Africa, which eventually led to the collapse of the apartheid regime. And the other very interesting time that it was used was in 1956. That actually involved Gaza. In 1956, you had Israel with the traditional colonial powers, Britain and France. They teamed up and they invaded Gaza and Egypt. The then leader of Egypt, Jamal Abdel Nasser, had nationalized the Suez Canal. He said, "This is Egyptian. You British can't just control the canal in perpetuity. We're going to take it." So the 3 of them invaded Gaza and Sinai to grab control of the Suez Canal. And the Security Council couldn't do anything because the French and the British have veto power there. So you had this incredible situation in 1956 where the US and the Soviet Union paired up and used the Uniting for Peace mechanism to put in place a peacekeeping force and effectively forced out the British, French, and eventually the Israelis. The Israelis actually tried to hold on to Gaza until 1957, but they eventually got out. So it has been used to very powerful effect in the past, and it could conceivably be used now. Now the question was, what can people do? It is something that can be. It's a global effort. So raising awareness of it and trying to get people from around the world to call for this, it's actually something that if we can get more and more countries, Brazil, Turkey, Algeria, Nigeria, Malaysia, Indonesia, so on, to do this, it's very much a global call. There are several good websites on this issue. One of them is stopgenocide.com. It has a good flyer on it, same flyer that's on my Papers Project thing. And it also allows you to email to foreign ministries and UN delegations of different countries. So that's stopgenocide.com. Has some really good tools to help people petition various governments to move on it, to stand up to the US and Israel. There have been, if people are in New York, there are regularly protests in New York around the U.S. mission, Israeli mission, and other missions right around the United Nations. I've tried very hard to get the student activism that, what was fomenting in New York at Columbia and NYU and CUNY and other places to focus on targeting the UN in particular. So those are some of the things that I've been pushing for to help make Uniting for Peace real.
And you spoke about the radical center, and how can people? What do you have advice for how people can go about trying to talk to their friends and neighbors about, let's say, a Democrat trying to convince a Trump voter to vote libertarian? What if the Trump voter says, "Well, I would prefer to vote for Trump because maybe they're more tough on immigration"? How do you have advice for how what arguments somebody could use to say, "Well, I'm going to delete one vote for the Democrats if you delete one vote for the Republicans, and we'll both vote third party, so neither of us are a spoiler"? But what are some things in this radical center that people have in common that you could use as an argument?
Absolutely. I think there's a perpetual note of surprise whenever people see that there's left-right agreement on various issues. So people don't accumulate all of the things. Trade has been a big issue. Things like NAFTA and however they've rebranded NAFTA. Civil liberties, free speech questions, the power of big tech, the power of Wall Street versus Main Street, the continual wars, massive military spending, drug wars, and obviously the genocide and all of the pro-Israeli policies. Those are just some of the things that many people on the so-called right and the so-called left basically agree on. Sometimes they use different language. People on the right, sometimes speak in terms of sovereignty, whereas people on the left speak in terms of democracy. But if you look at a lot of the policy outcome, it's very similar. And I think that they should be open to insights from each other. For example, there are a lot of people on the right who are critical of the Federal Reserve. There's no reason why people on the left shouldn't be more critical of the Federal Reserve. It's a very anti-democratic institution that sets much of economic policy that should be in the hands of the public. It's basically a U.S. central bank. We didn't have that for most of our history. It's been an instrument to manipulate the economy largely for the benefit of Wall Street. So that's something that, the left can learn from the right. Something like universal health care, single payer plan. What would be more America first than to say every American citizen should have health care? So I think that there are cross things that can happen. We shouldn't be pretending that we all agree on everything 100% and we're all the same, but we should be able to figure out ways of working together because the system loves to divide and conquer, globally as well as domestically. Immigration, I think, is a particularly interesting issue. Let me say a few words specifically about immigration. I view immigration as largely a symptomatic issue, and that's why the establishment loves it, because it's a great way to divide people on the left and the right. There is nothing inherent that makes people want to come to the United States. All right. They come to the United States because we make war overseas that turns people into refugees. We have these hideous drug policies that make cartels, destabilize countries as well. And we have horrible trade policies that undo a lot of society. I mean, in the 90s, was a huge thing with Mexican farmers. NAFTA allowed U.S. agribusiness firms with their industrialized, corn and so on to dump cheap corn onto Mexico. It impoverished all of these Mexican farmers who could no longer make a living tending their land. They became poor migrants in cities and eventually tried to get into the United States. That wouldn't have happened if they were able to tend their lands, tend their farms, and make a decent living doing that. They don't, they don't. People don't jump out of the womb saying, "I want to go to the United States." They go to the United States because things become destabilized in their own countries. So I think that if we address the root causes of things, of wars, drug policy, trade policy, corporate policy, and so on, there would be a dramatic reduction in desperate immigration and issues like that the establishment really loves to use as wedge issues to keep people in their partisan boxes. I think would largely melt away.
So people can check that out at votepact.org. Now we have a question for Carol. Action steps. Can you discuss in more detail about the link between Epstein and Israel and the potential real estate deal Trump and Netanyahu have expressed after relocating Palestinians? There doesn't seem to be a rebuilding plan yet.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. Lots of great questions there. Dropsite News had a series of reports recently based on hacked emails, particularly between Epstein and Ehud Barak, who was a former Israeli prime minister and was also a so-called defense minister for a time, and was also head of the Mossad for a time. And it showed the extent to which Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted pedophile, was helping open doors for contacts for Barak to make money, as well as making deals for Israel to do surveillance, getting surveillance contracts in Cote d'Ivoire and other business deals in Mongolia, and even perhaps most significantly, and I'm sure they're going to come out with a lot more specifics, trying to push for the ouster of Assad from Syria and trying to get the U.S. to attack Iran. There's all this email traffic between the two of them as to how we can make these things happen. Israel long wanted a lot of the things that have happened, including the ouster of Assad, the ouster of Saddam Hussein, the ouster of Gaddafi. These were all authoritarian figures, it's true, but they did provide some sort of bulwark against Israel. And now Israel doesn't have to contend with any of that. Syria is basically in chaos. You have somebody who's a quote unquote former member of Al Qaeda as the head of Syria now, which the U.S. and Israeli establishments basically wanted and were backing. And you have a much weaker Iraq, much Libya in shambles. Egypt basically in change. So there's a long-term process whereby please keep the thank you, Heather, for truth, but please keep the thank you. Just I want to make sure I answer her Carol's question. You had these documents called Securing the Realm by Richard Pearl, who's sort of the main leader of the neocons, written for Netanyahu in the 1990s as to how we wanted to shape the Middle East. And they followed their plans. These guys have a plan. And we need to be very strategic in how we undermine it. So Epstein played a significant role in that. What's happening now, Israel's goal, clearly they want to get the Palestinians out, to take more and more land. Israel's a settler colonial state. It wants to drive the Palestinians out. It drove them out, including my father in 1948, again in 1967, and now it wants to do it again. And they are having some success. Palestinians are desperate and to get out of Gaza just simply in order to live. Some of them are willing to leave, even though they don't want to leave, but they don't want to die and starve. So they are effectively expelling or trying to expel and ethnically cleansing, or trying to. I saw some recent reports about these scammy things that they're doing now to take Palestinians to South Africa. But it isn't even backed by the South African government. It seems to be an Israeli firm that's not labeling itself as an Israeli firm to effectively get Palestinians out. In terms of a rebuilding plan, what Israel has done now is basically to divide Gaza. It still is in complete control of about 58% of Gaza. They've established what they call a yellow line running basically along it, so that the Palestinians are basically just along the shore. And they have a bunch of gangs and others who are controlling that area of the yellow line. They're shooting Palestinians who are trying to go back to their homes in that area. And they might try to be rebuilding that area because it has these, Palestinian gangs who are on the Israeli payroll, and show that off as, oh, we're rebuilding things. So if you see so-called rebuilding going on, check as to where it's going on. It's not where most of the Palestinians are. And as I said, they're not allowing rebuilding or even shelters, even shelter equipment like tents and so on, in for the coming winter. The Norwegian Council on Refugees just put out a statement condemning Israel for that. So the plan isn't to rebuild. They're going to try to prevent that. Parts of the international community, even those who are backing the Saudi and the French proposal, which I think is highly problematic, might attempt to do some kind of rebuilding. But what really should happen, of course, is that Israel should get completely out of Gaza. It should abide by international law. There have been numerous court orders and UN Security Council resolutions calling for that. The problem with those Security Council, with those UN General Assembly resolutions, is that they don't have teeth. They don't have enforcement. They don't call for sanctions. They don't call for a force or a mission to implement those orders. So there hasn't been any meaningful rebuilding. Carol is saying many UN countries back the two-state solution. That's true. Continues to be roadblocks for this happening. Well, the two-state solution. Israel. A main thing that severely hinders the possibility of a two-state solution is that Israel, what it's doing now with Gaza, taking over 58% of it, it's largely been doing for decades in the West Bank. They've taken over so much land. They've put in so many so-called settlements, colonial outposts. They're all illegal under an international law. They've confiscated so much land. They put in this road system and confiscated water and other resources and so on, that they've basically entrenched the West Bank under this matrix of control, with the a wall system that makes you could be in the next town over. You're a Palestinian and you have to go way around this wall in order to get so that a drive that should take you 20 minutes ends up taking you 3 hours to really sort of devastate Palestinian life on the West Bank. So a big part of the problem with a two-state solution is that Israel has liquidated so much of the West Bank effectively. A lot of people have said, a two-state solution is no longer actually tenable, and what you really need is a one-state solution, which is basically a South Africa solution, to say make it all one country, present-day Israel and the West Bank and Gaza, and make it one person, one vote. So there are prominent people who advocate for that, and to make quote unquote Israel a state of all of its citizens, which it isn't now. That's not how Israel defines itself. So that is another possibility. That would basically entail the collapse of Israel as a Zionist entity, as an apartheid state, just as in South Africa, you had the collapse of the apartheid system in South Africa.
We have another question. Immigration focus, yes, a very purposeful division plan by Project 2025 team, divide and conquer.
Yeah, I think like I said before, I think one aspect of this is when the attacks on free speech are real, and I'm obviously opposed to them. But when they use ICE to target people like Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia student, and other students using ICE, I think it's a very calculated effort by the Trump administration and the rest of the establishment to rebrand the question from a genocide question, where Trump is losing his base, to an immigration question, where Trump's anti-immigration base supports that. Oh, if somebody's here illegally, they should leave. Of course, that they're using ICE completely inappropriately here, but that doesn't necessarily sink through. But the goal is to reframe the subject as an immigration one, and I think that that's largely a strategy by the Trump administration, and it plays to the Democrats as well. Right? The Democrats don't want to stop the establishment Democrats do not want to stop the genocide, but they're happy to polarize with Trump over immigration issues, so that both of them can pretend that they are catering to their bases when they're actually manipulating their bases.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. We have a clips and a more music as well. Does anyone have any more questions to add? Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And we have a clip on censorship coming up.
Something I would like to raise, which was actually my first published paper, was how you and the Likud party are cut from the same ideological cloth as Trump and the GOP in America. And so specifically with Charlie Kirk's assassination, who was a big mentor of mine, who's my first mentor in the space, evangelicals, from all my research, evangelicals are the reason that Israel has been supported in public sphere outside of just Jews. So with Charlie's assassination and with the kind of trajectory that we see with like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, I guess I'm curious about what's another game plan if we lose evangelical support for the state of Israel. What's our backup plan to be strong, like outside the diaspora?
Christian influencers. Okay, you said we talked about the woke right, and you said I call it the woke Reich. That's a brilliant observation. The woke right, because these people, you know, they're not any different from the woke left. I mean, they're insane. They're loonies, but they're actually meeting on some of the things. And what we have to do is we have to secure that part of the base of our support in the United States. That is being challenged systematically. A lot of this is done with money. Money of NGOs, vast. Money of governments, vaster. Okay? We have to fight back. How do we fight back? Our influencers. I think you should also talk to them if you have a chance. To that community, they're very important. And secondly, we're going to have to use the tools of battle. You know, the weapons change over time. You can't fight today with swords. That doesn't work very well. Okay, and you can't fight with cavalry. That doesn't work very well. And you have these new things, you know, like drones, things like that. I won't get into that. But we have to fight with the weapons that apply to the battlefields in which we're engaged. And the most important ones are the social media. And the most important purchase that is going on right now is TikTok. TikTok, number one. And I hope it goes through because it can be consequential. And the other one, what's the other one that's most important? X. That's very good. And, you know, so we have to talk to Elon. He's not an enemy. He's a friend. We should talk to him. Now, if we can get those two things, we get a lot. And I could go on other things, but that's not the point right now. We have to fight the fight, okay? To give direction to the Jewish people and give direction to our non-Jewish friends or those who could be our Jewish our friends. Are we going to succeed with everyone? No. Will there be a strong counterpart? Yes.
What is Larry Ellison doing in the United States? He's buying Paramount to do propaganda films for Israel. His son is buying CBS, and they'll put Barry Weiss as editor-in-chief. This is the takeover that Netanyahu outlined in the meeting with Deborah Leah and these other influencers.
And the most important purchase that is going on right now is TikTok, number one.
You have this dynamic where Miriam Adelson has contributed hundreds of millions of dollars to Donald Trump, paying for his campaign. This is an Israeli asset. So it is an 8-front war.
We have a clip from Jewish Voices for Peace, and then we'll have some more music.
Do you know what Zionists hate the most? Jewish people speaking out against the genocide in Gaza. They call it self-hate, but I call it integrity. Because not all Jews are Zionists, and not all Zionists are Jews. Judaism is a religion, a culture, and a community. Zionism is a political ideology. One's about faith, family, and ethics, and the other one's about power, land, and ethno-nationalism. Conflating the two is political weaponization. It's what the Zionists want. They try to use it to silence Jewish voices, those that say what's happening in Gaza is wrong. It hurts Palestinians, it hurts Jews, and it hurts the truth.
Now we have a clip from David Rovics. Then we have another clip of Palestinians and Israeli musicians performing together. But first we have a song by David Rovics titled From Auschwitz to Gaza.
The camp's open air. That's the one thing that distinguishes what is happening in Gaza right now compared to the time of the Third Reich and its crimes. Against any decency, against any sanity, against all the children, against all humanity. From Auschwitz to Gaza, there's no difference between babies and fighters on that side of the fence, the side where they starve because the food is kept out by the occupation, and no others, no doubt, where people are dropping dead on their feet while searching for crumbs of food on the street. Gaza, all night and all day, all the people inside just wasting away. Everyone waiting for death to arrive, shot or starved or burned alive, where each passing moment is punctured by groans of 1 million children as thin as their bones. Auschwitz to Gaza, the outside world knew, and many lamented about what they might do, while their leaders looked for money to be made in the arms trade. Once again, just like this, profiting from the apocalypse. From Auschwitz to Gaza, the stages of starvation are exactly the same under occupation. First the fat goes, then all the rest, the muscle, the marrow, the milk in the breasts of all nursing mothers, as in front of their eyes their babies cry their last little cries. From Auschwitz to Gaza, under either command, all of the killing is entirely planned. Whether they call it a camp or a zone, it's all the same skin and bone. Whether they say work makes you free or humanitarian city. From Auschwitz to Gaza, the political line, from occupied Poland to Palestine, leaders outside will say we weren't aware of the extent of the horrors happening there. They'll shed a few tears and somberly then make a speech at the UN. From Auschwitz to Gaza, all over the place, the lies of the leaders who seek to save face, who say we would have acted if only we knew all that they claimed they really would do. And no one will believe at the time when some foolish person says never again. From Auschwitz to Gaza.
From Auschwitz to Gaza by David Rovics. And the next clip will be a clip from the West Eastern Divan Orchestra, which was founded by the Israeli conductor Daniel Barenboim and the Palestinian academic Edward Said in 1999. And they're musicians from Palestine, Israel, and elsewhere in the Middle East. And they're going to perform Beethoven's third movement of Beethoven 9. Okay, Beethoven 9, conducted by Daniel Barenboim with the West Eastern Devon Orchestra. I wanted to announce the upcoming events, but first I wanted to mention again, if people want to support the Middle East Children's Alliance, they can go to meccaforpeace.org, MECAFOR, and the word peace, PEACE.org. And that's how they can support the work to help the most urgent needs of children and families in Gaza. And I want to thank you, Sam, for your time, for your talk, and your answering questions. And I wanted to ask if you had any final thoughts before we wrap up the event.
No, just to thank you and Kelly. One of the clips that you played there, mentioned the whole Charlie Kirk thing, and I think that was also interesting. He was beginning to turn on Israel. He had been a fanatic or very substantial backer of Israel, and there's a lot of evidence that he was beginning to turn on that issue. So that they're Netanyahu and company are continuing to pretend that he was still an adamant supporter of Israel, as in that clip, and that's not accurate. So I think that goes to show that everybody is reachable, and we shouldn't give up on anybody. We should demonize structures which are oppressive, and find ways, whether it's art and music and journalism, education, technology work, video making, whatever it is, to try to reach people. But we shouldn't write anybody off, and we should try to make alliances with people on just causes where we can, and firmly tell them where we disagree with them. I think that's how we can proceed. So thank you so much for having me, and it's been a pleasure answering folks' questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. And I wanted to briefly mention that we are looking at some topics for upcoming events for our Time to Break Silence next year and the year after. We wanted to talk a bit about Western Sahara. We also wanted to bring back the issue of farm animal suffering and climate change. And there's a book by Heather Lumeyer, her poem "Broken" was read by Alec Baldwin at our A Time to Break Silence event in 2015. And she has a new book out, "If Your Tears Were Human." It's about animals and agriculture. And we would love to collaborate with her again for future events. So stay tuned for next year's event. Thank you all so much for your support.